two kinds of righteousness. What are we talking about when we talk about two kinds of righteousness? The two kinds of righteousness is an idea, a paradigm, way of thinking that I would consider to be inherent in a lot of Lutheran thinking. And what the contention then is the two kinds of righteousness is not a doctrine, but it's just a way of approaching the doctrinal task. That's how Luther described it in his Galatians commentary of 1535. He talked about two kinds of righteousness, a passive and an active righteousness. Now, the best way to really kind of get a handle on two kinds of righteousness is to illustrate it and to think about it in terms of two axes. So we think about God, and we think about the individual human being. And the human being is in a relationship with God by virtue of his creation, but it's a relationship that is fractured by sin and so is problematic. And so to be right with God is one of the big questions for the human. How do I get right with God? And the answer, of course, we know is he's right with God only because of God's grace, only because of God's actions. And so that's what we think about, and it's what we call the righteousness before God, or a passive righteousness is the term that Luther uses. Or you might call it, even as the picture will illustrate, a vertical righteousness. This is the righteousness of faith. This is the righteousness that God gives to us because of Christ, and it comes to me only because of what God has done for me in Christ. This is where the gospel runs everything, and the gospel reigns full blast. So I know where I stand before God because God says, you are forgiven in Christ. God does it. I do nothing. I'm completely passive. God does it all. I simply receive what God gives. This is the area of this vertical righteousness, or we might say righteousness before God. And the Latin phrase for that is coram Deo. Before God, in the presence of God, before the face of God. So coram Deo, in the vertical relationship, I am righteous only because God declares it, and God makes me righteous because of his work in Christ. It's all God's work to me. Now, the key to understanding the idea of two kinds of righteousness is then what about the other kind of righteousness? And the other kind of righteousness is not antithetical to this righteousness, but is consistent and in relationship with it. And that is a righteousness on the horizontal plane, a righteousness of me, the Christian, in relationship to other creatures. So other people in my family or at work, or people I encounter just in my life. Or it's even my relationship to other parts of creation. So the trees that are out there, and the flowers that bloom, and all the other different parts of creation, all of these things, I'm in relation to all these things. And the cats and the dogs and whatever else you want to draw up here. I'm in relation to all the rest of creation. In this horizontal sphere, I have responsibilities to carry out to them. And that righteousness, I do. I carry it out. I fulfill this. I'm responsible. Now, I do this work because God enables me and God graces me and God equips me, but I'm doing it, and I'm responsible. And when I figure out my work, my neighbor benefits. When I'm a good father, my children benefit. When I'm being a good husband, my wife benefits. When I do my work as a professor and do my diligence and teach well, my students benefit. So what I do matters to those around me. Does what I do here win favor with God? No, because that's in the vertical realm. In the vertical realm, it's all passive. But in the horizontal realm, it's about what I do and about my responsibilities. So here, we're talking about active righteousness. Here, it's what I do. In this horizontal realm, it's what I carry out. And in this horizontal realm, what is it that guides me? What is it that teaches me? What is it that helps me know what to do? Well, frankly, it's the will of God. And as we learned before, the will of God is the law, God's will for my life. And so the will of God teaches me, shows me what to do, and that's good. And it guides me and directs me so I fulfill my righteousness in the horizontal realm. So we have two kinds of righteousness, a vertical righteousness, passive, simply gifting to me, and I have a horizontal righteousness, an active righteousness that I carry out in my activities for the sake of those around me. And both of these are working together, and they come together in me, the Christian, who's living always in my passive righteousness and always actively doing my active righteousness, both at once, because that's who God has made me to be. So down here we think about this as the coram mundo, or before the face of the world realm. So we have two nice Latin phrases to capture this, and now we have two kinds of righteousness going full tilt, and me, the Christian, living in the reality of both at once.